Chapter 1170, the final chapter of 2025 or the first chapter of 2026, depending on when you read it, because at the end of every year the scans are usually released a week earlier than the official, but I'll say last chapter of 2025 because that's when I read it, after Christmas, before the new year. Also, I have a cold, maybe the flu. It's the middle of winter, it doesn't snow anymore, meaning this is just an extended, glorified autumn and it's depressing as hell, but I still have One Piece. And one thing that is completely set in stone, the anime has now concluded what you could call its first season after episode 1155, which came out this past Sunday. Well, for me it's tomorrow because I'm writing this on the Saturday, but for simplicity's sake, when this video is out, the episode will have aired, so while I don't know how I'm going to feel, I'm going to assume I sat there for a couple minutes in complete silence as it finally hits me that there's no more One Piece anime till April at all, at least with the previous 6-month break there was the remaster of Fishman Island, while here there's nothing. Jump Festa was also a week and a half ago where there was a sizable amount of stuff talked about. Everything we wanted to hear about, technically we did hear about, and even though some of the updates weren't massive and it's stuff we pretty much already put together ourselves, an official update is still better than nothing, and there's always Oda's message for next year, what to expect in the manga, and after this chapter, or with this chapter, we will be in that next year, but first, there is still this chapter to go through. We return right where we left off with Loki dodging the hammer which crashes into one of the pillars nearby, and honestly, it's a miracle, a Christmas miracle, that this castle is still standing in the present day because we saw the extent of the damage when Road helped us enter the castle, but seeing it play out firsthand is a different story entirely. This castle must have been incredibly well built to withstand all of this chaos and destruction, a massive portion of which looks to have been caused by the hammer Ragnia itself. Anyway, Loki's thinking the same thing I mentioned at the end of the last chapter, although I said it sarcastically, jokingly, that what if there is actually someone who had just been vibing inside the treasure room this entire time and they threw the hammer at Loki as a way to deter him, so he charges back in and all that's there is the chest, as he hears the hammer behind him which is so unbelievably heavy that it causes the entire ground to crumble and fall apart beneath their feet, or rather beneath Loki's feet and the hammer's hammerhead. This is what I meant by the hammer causing a large part of the damage, because it's so extensive Loki has to resort to mimicking Legolas to avoid getting buried in the rubble. I can't tell if that damage was caused by the hammer landing on the ground or if it did something after landing on the ground, because we know it's alive now, so what if it started shaking, sending vibrations through the ground? So Loki mentions the hammer is heavy, which is one of the aspects of it in its many different interpretations that determines who can lift it or why only Thor can lift it. We also have the idea of worthiness as well, which is also relevant in the chapter, but as for it being very heavy, I want to bring in Frieren. It's obvious Loki is many times more powerful than he is. Take away the hammer, take away the devil fruit, and the statement is just as true as it was before. But back in Dressrosa, he fought against Mark Weiss, and that was literally a battle of pure power, pure brute strength, and eventually at the cost of his entire body, his bones breaking under the pressure of his attack, Gungnir, named after Odin's spear, he launched Mark Weiss straight up into the sky, into the birdcage, who at that point had used his devil fruit to modify his weight to 10,000 tons, which is heavy, very, very heavy, and unironically, it's one of the best feats of strength, pure strength, we have seen in the entire story. And yet, he still isn't going to wield Ragnia purely because of it being based on Mjolnir. It's kind of obvious this is a weapon for Loki and Loki alone, but what I'm saying is that say Frieren had Loki's and the hammer's permission to lift it, I don't think he would even be able to get it to budge. The only other guy who I can see possibly doing it in the future is Usopp, which has been a theory for the longest time now. He's going to lift a real multi-ton hammer instead of one that's just for show. I don't know how he's going to lift it, but I'm still hoping Usopp's going to have his moment eventually in the arc. Hopefully. Maybe he doesn't actually lift it, we know it's alive, so what if he grips the handle and the hammer throws itself while he's hanging on, portraying the image that he threw it while in reality the hammer throws him. But the shot of him hanging onto the hammer as it flies through the air could resemble the image of Thor using the hammer to fly, which could be really funny and really cool. And the chapter cuts back and forth between this and everything in the throne room since it's all happening at the same time, and Harald says Loki is wasting his time, and we've always thought that the hammer had been passed down through generations in the royal family because it was being saved for something, for someone, for the right time where the right person would be there to eat it. With that time obviously being now, with the return of Joyboy, the meeting of the two monarchs which the Sea King spoke about and all of that, although it's still not 100% clear who the two monarchs are. Is Luffy one of them as the future king of the pirates? Are they talking about Shirahoshi? She's our best bet at the moment for one of the two as the ancient weapon Poseidon with the strongest connection to the Sea Kings. It's been speculated that Momonosuke could be the second monarch as the new shogun of Wano, but now we have Loki, the prince and possibly future king of Elbaf, and this makes much more sense when you factor in the revelation of Mosa's true identity being Shirahoshi, meaning the meeting of the two monarchs is almost undoubtedly going to be between Loki and Shirahoshi. But back on track, this devil fruit, I can't speak for anyone else, but I also assumed that the idea of it being passed down meant none of the previous kings tried to eat it. They weren't tempted. They knew their role, they knew what they had to do, it wasn't the right time, so they never touched it. So they just guarded it, kept it hidden and safe for the next generation and the next until the time came, but that's not the case at all. It's not that they chose not to eat it, but instead Ragnia didn't let anyone eat it. The hammer didn't deem anyone worthy, so I'm still a bit skeptical over if this is what the actual text intended to say or if the translation team here has taken some creative liberties because of how well that line fits with the idea of Ragnia being based off Mjolnir, a hammer not in Norse mythology but in Marvel, the MCU, which is the most well-known depiction of Thor and the hammer working on that principle of worthiness. But this also means the hammer has been guarding the fruit for all of these years, all of these centuries, which is another thing I just threw out the last chapter, since its first instinct was to attack Loki, and from this one line of Harald's we learn a lot of information. If centuries have gone by with the legendary devil fruit just sitting in the treasure room, then that surely means that Ragnia has also been there for just as long, to have been protecting it that entire time, all the way back to the Void Century. But on top of that, for it to have been given or entrusted this mission would also suggest that this hammer, with its own sentience and power, had the trust of someone important enough. You know, whoever this person was wouldn't have just given the hammer its own abilities and thrown it in the treasure room. I feel like there had to have been a level of belief between them, the hammer and this person. So this would mean if the kings of the past weren't passing the fruit down waiting for the right time, but rather it was being passed down due to their inability to eat it. But I still think that's what's happening here. The fruit has been preserved for the future, but the big difference is that the hammer Ragnia was the one entrusted with the mission rather than the kings of future generations. And with it having been around since the Void Century in this theory, who's one very important individual who was around during the same time, who also happened to have had a wild collection of friends and companions? Joyboy. I think Ragnia was either one of Joyboy's companions or was the weapon of one of Joyboy's companions. Maybe it was the king of Elbaf at the time. Let's call him Odin, which I guess would make the hammer one of Joyboy's companions anyway. And one more thing is that apparently Vegapunk was the one who discovered how to give inanimate objects devil fruit abilities. It would make sense that this hammer, an object from the distant past, would also come from a time where there was a kingdom with technology greater than the present day, greater than anything Vegapunk has created, a kingdom's technology which he had been trying to replicate. So it's understandable that the ancient kingdom would have also had the capabilities to give an inanimate object a devil fruit as well. So based on this theory, Ragnia is all of a sudden our greatest connection to the Void Century and Joyboy on Elbaf, greater than even the mural, because the hammer was alive and the hammer was there. Moving on, Harald believes the fruit will be his given his newfound power until Shanks and Gaban come in again with attacks coated in Conquerors to cut off one of his legs, and Gaban finally gives us a full explanation of how this actually works, how you actually defeat a holy knight or anyone with immortality. Although it is just confirming everything that many people have thought since Gaban first sliced up Sommers in the present. The key is in fact advanced Conqueror's Haki coating, and he continues to talk while this fight with Harald rages on with a new detail to fill in more of the gaps in the past, which is that the knights on many occasions descended to the lower world and attacked the Roger pirates in an effort to get Shanks back, which of course they would have done. He's one of the sons of their captain, one of the most influential celestial dragons. Even if he was just an average celestial dragon, I'm sure they would have went to retrieve him anyway, after being unknowingly taken. I think that's the main difference between Shanks and Doflamingo. While Shanks was a baby and had no choice in being taken, Doflamingo's father chose to take his family down to the lower our world, which condemned the rest of them to that fate as well. But Shanks continues to say that Summers mentioned something like this to him, and of course it had to be Summers because we can now put together that if the God Valley incident wasn't the event that gave him his Gabon PTSD, then it would be these incidents, and with Gabon saying he sliced them up and sent them packing, then he would have messed up Summers on multiple occasions, which I think makes it an even better fit for the source of his PTSD than God Valley, because he would have been put down constantly. And as they basically begin some small talk during the fight about celestial dragons' lives, with Shanks saying his own life constantly gives him chills, maybe saying he's always on edge, or that it's crazy how he's ended up here from where he began. Gabon brings up that word again, that word which has been especially relevant in this flashback with Zebek. He says Shanks' life comes down to fate, and with that word you'd usually associate it with prophecy or something. It was fated to be, it was written long ago, the chosen one, that kind of thing, and that does apply in this story. But I think another way to interpret the usage of this word is to say that the way your life goes is the way it should be, not to say it's out of your control, but to say no matter what mistakes you make or where you end up, you're always on the right path. Something like that, you know, like Shanks being found by the Roger pirates was a complete accident, but accidents can lead to some of the most important, beautiful things. And this section of the chapter ends with them saying Loki is the best chance they have, obviously in reference to him gaining the fruit, but it would be interesting if Loki is actually the strongest of the three at this point, because Gabon is arguably past his prime already here, and Shanks, you could say, isn't in his prime yet, which would put Loki and his conquerors above Shanks. But with the way both species age, humans aging faster, Shanks ages, progresses, grows faster than Loki, meaning by the time we get to the present, Shanks is now stronger than him. Or maybe Loki is already at the endgame level of strength, where he is one of the strongest ever. But also in this case, the power of the devil fruit in conjunction with Loki's haki is very important as well in taking down Harald. So back to the man of the hour, he is sick of this other hammer getting in his way, so he swings at it again, and as it flies towards him, the collision shatters his own hammer, which I guess was made out of stone, but his attack was still strong enough that Ragnir is deflected over his head and lands behind him. So he turns around to see that the handle of this hammer has turned into a giant squirrel, with the head of the hammer being the squirrel's head. Ragnir is alive, it does have a devil fruit, and it is a mythical zone, the power of Ratatoska, a creature in Norse mythology which ran up and down Yggdrasil, the world tree, still unconfirmed technically, but pretty much confirmed. So going off some quick research into the Ratatoska from the mythos, the first thing that stood out to me is that it acted as a messenger between Nidhogger at the bottom of the tree and the eagle at the top, and it was delivering insults that were being thrown between the two, and this squirrel reveled in the idea of keeping their anger alive, keeping their rivalry going. So that sort of mischief reminds me of Loki from the mythology, although I don't know if there was ever an actual connection between those two. But to build on that, the idea came about that Ratatoska wished to harm or damage the tree, which fits again with our Loki in the story, since when we met him, he said he'll destroy Elbaf, as well as the first thing he did when getting free was using Ragnir to strike the tree. Plus the Nidhogger connection, another thing that points towards that being Loki's own fruit. Back to the fight, Gabon mentions he's never fought an immortal being with conqueror's haki of their own, which is making this fight a lot more difficult. Maybe that's why Luffy didn't have much success against the elders in Egghead, since they also have conquerors, that or he never actually used his conqueror's haki when he was fighting them. Jarl is somehow still conscious, and credit to the gods who have been trying to do something ever since Harald told them to kill him. They have been giving it a very good go, even though this has led to many of their deaths and defeats, and we eventually know all of their deaths, but they did their jobs. They never got complacent because their king was Harald, who could protect himself, so fair play to them. But Harald is on top in this fight, and Loki now has Ragnir's blessing, I guess, to eat the devil fruit, which is just, for some reason I'm seeing the scene as similar to when All Might tells Midoriya that he can be a hero. But the idea that the squirrel is All Might in this analogy is really funny to me. It's even nodding like, well done my student, here is your reward, like you're worthy of the dragon scroll or something, you know. It's just really funny. Anyway, at first I thought the chest was empty, but the next panel shows Loki holding this tiny fruit in the palm of his hand, and I remember he's like 70 meters tall. The fruit would be tiny compared to the chest as well, so he eats it and makes a face, because remember, all devil fruits are canonically disgusting. He transforms, spikes up its either spines along his back or spiky fur, so the Fenrir theory is still possible, but I'm firmly in the Meathugger camp and we see him in all of his silhouetted glory. It's not even a silhouette really, there's no outline, just pitch black darkness and two eyes in the middle. He rushes back to the fight where Harald lands the first blow with his axe, but Loki strikes right back and his attack is strong enough to send his father flying into the wall, taking chunks out of his face, his chest, his abdomen, his arm, so it was clearly a swipe with his claws. And we did see claw marks in the castle when we infiltrated with Road. He then smacks his father across the face before returning back to normal as if he's testing out his new powers. He's done the devil fruit, now onto the hammer. He's ready to keep swinging, but his attacks were powerful enough to bring his father's senses back to him. And maybe this was possible thanks to Shanks and Gabon's efforts earlier being stacked as well, but if it was all Loki, that's crazy. So this is the final talk between father and son, a relationship that had been twisted by Harald's absence as Loki faced hardship after hardship at the same time. But one thing was true regardless, which was that Harald loved his son, always loved his son, and he reaffirms his belief in Loki to take over, take the reins, lead the nation into the future, even thanking him for what he did for Ida, how he burned down the village, which is something we all questioned. Why was Loki imprisoned and did they know why he did it? We now know at the very least Harald did, and we know he could have freed him at any time since he did summon Loki to the castle, so maybe he didn't do it earlier because he did still know his son. His time in prison wasn't a punishment, even though it was originally intended to be. I'm sure they locked him away before Harald returned, and part of the reason he did stay there afterwards is because he still did burn down an entire village. No matter the reason, Harald simply could not look the other way as the king of the entire nation, as cruel as it was given Ida's death at the time. But also it's Loki, he could have broken out easily, so I feel like it was in part his own choice to stay. We all talk about how unfair it was that he wasn't able to grieve his mother's death. Maybe he chose to stay locked up because he knew he wouldn't be able to handle it. I doubt Loki would have had any idea of how he was supposed to grieve, but Harald thanks him, he knows how much she meant to him, and all the while Loki is shouting at his father about how crazy this is, how unfair this is, how he'll never forgive him. But ultimately I think all of these words boil down to the fact that he doesn't want to lose another parent, because deep down he also knows he loves his father back, and Harald knows his son well enough to understand what he's saying. He may not have been there enough, but he still knows his son, with his final words of the greatest king of Elbaf being to tell Loki that he loves him too. A massive bolt of lightning strikes the castle as Loki strikes his father down, breaking him into a million pieces. As the bolt strikes Harald directly, it's clear regular lightning too, so it's his fruit abilities being channeled through the hammer, but it's a great panel, huge impact. Loki has tears flowing down his face and he looks to be remembering the scene from chapter 1154, I believe, where Harald first meets his son after Estrid's death. But from Loki's perspective now, in that scene he had already given up on life, but he looks to be thinking back now, seeing his father's smiling face, the delight, the love of a father seeing their son, a father who had always loved him even though he thought he had no one. So he's just lost the two people who cared for him the most, while probably blaming himself for both as well. He strikes down his father here, and the people of the alcohol village wouldn't have poisoned Ida if he wasn't related to them, if they didn't have that shared blood, if Loki wasn't born. And the chapter ends with Harald's words. I can't tell if he's thinking this now or if Loki is just remembering his father's words, but all that matters now is securing Elbaf's future as Loki cries up to the sky, which is solidifying for me the idea that he will take the blame on himself as to not ruin his father's legacy and to keep his dream alive, because the truth would surely mean the nation abandoning his ideals. Even if they didn't grow to hate him, the truth would lead them back to their warrior ways, the opposite of securing the nation's future. So we have learned the truth, what actually happened 14 years ago, so I think we have one more chapter left of this backstory before returning to the present. Maybe we return at the end of next chapter. We see the fallout from this day. Loki leaves the country shouldering this giant burden, pun intended, and we cut back to him with Luffy, Frieren and the rest, with maybe a narrator box saying 3 minutes have passed, saving the rest of this story for Shanks' own backstory since he has a major role to play in it. So we will see Loki play the role of the villain. We may see Shanks and Gabon and Elder Jarl play up to this as well, since Loki has now committed to keeping his father's legacy intact. But back to the present, Gerd still said his recovery would take several months, so maybe he's so strong that he is already at his endgame level, like I said, that top tier echelon of fighters, so we will see him fight here in this arc, not at full strength, and yet he will will still be keeping up with Luffy, meaning Loki is currently the strongest guy on elbaf, minus Emu. But again, one final chapter to go for this backstory, making it 20 chapters long and concluding another, this is commonplace now, it's to be expected, another amazing backstory.